All right, so this is a bass review video on the Lakland 5501 bass guitar. Just got to say, this bass is awesome. I know that's a spoiler alert there, where I'm giving away the ending of the video, but yeah, you'll still want to watch the video and find out all about it and why it's so awesome. But this bass, well, like I said, it's awesome, and if you're watching this video, it probably means you don't have access to one locally so that you can go check it out. And so you're online looking at videos to try and find out, you know, if it's something that you're interested in actually getting. And you've probably been to some other videos where you have a lot of sound examples, and that's great. But this video is geared towards those that really are interested in making a buying decision. They want to find out if this bass really is the right bass for them. So in addition to sound examples, which I will do on this video, I'm also going to talk a lot about the bass, demonstrate all the different aspects of the bass so that you really have a good amount of knowledge on this bass to decide if it's something that you want to buy or not. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first I think a little context is important to find out how I ended up with this bass, what was my decision for buying it. And so it all kind of, it kind of goes back to this bass right back here, this Ibanez EHB bass. This bass basically ruined it for all of my other full-size basses. It was kind of a game changer bass for me. It's been my primary bass that I've been playing for the last 2 years up until getting this bass here. And yeah, I love it. It's fantastic bass. I have also done a review video on this bass on this video channel as well that you can check out. But as much as I've loved this bass, I was kind of missing playing a full-size bass and also a bass with parallel frets, because you know, this one has the fan frets, which are really, it's easy enough to adjust to and play, but I just kind of find that, yeah, I think I do have a preference for parallel frets, and I also do like a full-size bass. But I love how light and well balanced this bass is, and how well it plays and how well it sounds. So I thought, well, okay, but it's ruined me on all my other basses, in particular my Music Man Stingray basses. I had 2 of them, a fretted and a fretless version, and love those basses. I've had them for over 20 years, and great basses. I don't think you can find a better bass out there. They're just fantastic basses, but they didn't really fit my personal preference anymore of string spacing. I kind of felt like the neck was a little too tight for me, especially when playing my Fender Jazz bass, which I've always loved Fender Jazzes, and also because the Music Mans they're boat anchors. They're like 10.5, 11 pounds, so they're really heavy, and they're just, yeah, after playing this bass, you just can't go back to a bass that heavy anymore. I've always liked Lakland basses, but they've also been heavy basses too, particularly this model, the 5501, and trust me, I've searched the internet far and wide on a lot of different basses, including a lot of Lakland basses, and these are usually around 10 pounds, 11 pounds. Sometimes you might get them, you know, in the 9-pound range, but usually they're around 10 pounds at least. And so it's a heavier bass, so I didn't think I would end up with a Lakland bass. However, though, I found this one on the Talk Bass Classifieds, and the seller listed it for 7.8 pounds. I thought, I've got to buy that bass. And so since it's a used bass, I got a good deal on it. And of course, when I got it, it wasn't quite 7.8 pounds. It was 8 pounds or so roughly on my scale, but still, that's a very lightweight bass. I'll take it. And so yeah, it's been, you know, it's not as light as a Sandberg Super Light, which is also a fantastic bass, which I've had a chance to play a couple of those, and they're great, but they're also pretty expensive. So this is kind of my poor man Super Light. Just keep in mind though, as I do this review, that most Lakelands aren't as light as this bass, especially when I talk about the balance of the bass and things like that. So just keep in mind, mine's a little bit abnormal in its weight. Yeah, it's I kind of lucked out on getting a light version of this bass. All right, so I'm in the middle of editing the video, and while I was editing the video, I realized, you know, there's a lot of information that I'm sharing on here that I probably need some clarification on to make sure I'm not giving anybody any wrong information. So I did contact Lakland. I sent them an email with some questions I had, and they were nice enough to call back. In roughly about 10 minutes, I got a phone call from a nice gentleman named Brian who talked with me about some questions I had. And while I was talking with him and clarifying some information, we did talk about bass weight some, because I had heard from some other sources that Lakelands were going to start producing some lighter weight basses. I was asking if that was indeed true or if that was a rumor, and he helped clarify some things for me on bass weights of Lakelands. Basically, it's only been the last 3 or so years that Lakelands have been heavier, and they didn't used to be like that. But there's been some shortages of lightweight swamp ash wood, and so that's one of the things that, because of that, the shortages that there's been in the last 3 years, that's caused the basses to go up in weight. But they're actually now starting to source, I believe it's sassafras wood. That's so fun to say, sassafras. So they'll be sourcing some sassafras wood, and that'll be utilized in some future rounds of the Skylines that are coming out. And so that should bring the weights back down. I don't know, of course, what those weights will be. And of course, like any other wood, they'll vary from base to base. But anyway, that's some news directly from Lakland, is that the heavyweight Lakelands that I've been seeing are all have primarily been the ones that have been produced in the last 3 years or so. So that's not actually the norm, that Lakelands are in the 10 to 11 pound range. So some older ones like the one I have, that would explain why mine is so much lighter, and then newer ones that are being produced will come down in weight as well. So I hope that information is helpful for you, because throughout this video I'm talking about the heavy weight of Lakland basses, but that's only really for a certain period of time that Lakelands have been like that. But this bass has definitely been a game changer for me, just as this Ibanez EHB was a game changer for me. Now this bass has been a game changer for full-size basses for me, and so yeah, let me tell you why. All right, so first let's talk about the neck of the bass. And I have to say, I wasn't sure if I was going to like the neck of it, because I'm used to a Fender Jazz bass, which is a pretty thin neck, and whereas the Lakland here is a pretty chunky neck. It's a bit wide, and you definitely, you feel a full amount of mass in your hand when you're holding it. And so I thought, I'm probably not gonna like that because it's probably gonna be more fatiguing to play, but actually I was completely wrong in that assumption. Actually, I'm finding that the wider neck is actually less fatiguing on my left hand, especially my thumb doesn't seem to get as tired as much. And I've been playing the bass a lot since I've gotten it, and usually I'm playing longer than what I usually can play until my hand starts hurting. I never try and play beyond my hand hurting, but with this bass I've been playing a lot and my hand just hasn't been hurting. It's actually quite wonderful. And also my playing, I feel like I actually play better with this bass than pretty much any other bass that I have. It's just effortless to play. And the neck, it is a 35 scale neck as opposed to your typical full-size bass like this Fender Jazz, which is a 34 scale neck. That just means that the measurement from the bridge here to the nut is, in this case, 35 inches versus 34 inches on most other basses. And I was thinking, well, that's going to mean that it's probably going to be a little bit harder to play. And actually, I don't really notice the difference on it too much. I mean, it doesn't feel really any different than a 34 scale. So there was no worries there. And the 35 scale is going to help you get a better, tighter B string. So that's a good thing. And also, it's being that's a maple neck, every other, well, the exception of that one, but that's a bird's eye maple neck. It's a little bit of a darker wood. But this is well, actually I did have one other bass that had a maple neck, but that was for a short period of time. But typically I always have, some type of darker wood, rosewood style of wood, the pale ferro, or however you say that word. That's typically been like this bass, and the Music Man basses I had the pale ferro, however you pronounce that. So that's more what I'm used to. And so the maple neck, I actually never really particularly cared much for maple necks. I think it was more aesthetics. I just thought a darker wood looked better on the bass than this bright, whitish, neck. But actually, now that I'm playing this bass, I'm finding that I actually like maple a lot. And one of the things that's interesting is that I find that it's easier visually to play than a darker wood color on the neck. And I know that sounds weird, but it seems like the frets stand out, everything kind of stands out more, and I don't get lost as much on the neck as I would on other basses. Especially, that's one of the downsides of the fan frets on the EHB, is that sometimes it's like, ooh, it gets a little disorienting with the frets in multiple different angles and whatnot. So yeah, the neck on this is just, it's the easiest neck for me to play. It feels great, and I don't get lost on it. I guess you could say the edges here are, I guess they're rolled. It feels pretty smooth here. I don't seem to notice any sharpness or anything. The frets all line up nicely. So it all seems very smooth. Also, I know this is used, so I don't know if it's had any adjustments or anything like that from the previous owner, but it's definitely set up really well. There is no dead spots on the bass. All of the frets ring out perfectly fine, exactly as they should. No buzzes or anything else. It just totally came out of the box playing perfectly well. So I can't say that about all basses that have been shipped, but this one definitely came out of the box perfect. And to confirm on the neck, yeah, this is a 19 millimeter string spacing, which I really like. And boy, it just, compared to the Music Man basses, which are, again, wonderful basses, I just love this wider string spacing. It just fits me so much more as a player. The one thing that the Music Man basses, however, had was more of a natural finish on the back of the neck. I don't know if you would call it satin in their case. I think in their case it was more like a oiled wood or something like that, a natural wood that's oiled or something. I don't know all the terminology there, but it's definitely a smooth finish on the back of the neck, whereas this one, I'm not sure on this because it's definitely kind of a gloss finish, and I hate gloss finishes on necks. And that's one reason why I also love this base, because this has a satin finish neck, and this is a wonderful neck on this base. And so when I got this, I was like, oh, it's got a glossy finish on the back of it. But I have to say, out of all the bases that have a gloss finish, when you're playing it, it doesn't really feel as much. It's kind of hard to explain, but my finger doesn't feel sticky on the back of it like it typically does on other gloss finish bases. It just, my hand moves really well on it. So if that's a concern for you, I don't know if that's the case with all of these bases and if they all have a gloss finish on them, but all I can say is for a gloss finish, if it is gloss finished, it's definitely the best playing gloss finish neck that I've ever played, and it doesn't really bother me like a gloss finish usually would. Like for example, on this one, this Fender Jazz, I've actually spent a lot of time hitting it with the what do you call it, the scouring pad to knock down the gloss finish on it, just to kind of give it a smoother feel. But I'm not sure if I'm really going to need to do that on this bass. So that's kind of a bummer that it's gloss finished, but it's also a good thing that the gloss finish really doesn't impede the playing in any way on this bass. So there you go. Okay, this is me interrupting the video again in the editing process with some more clarification information from Lakland in regards to the necks of the Skyline series. On the Lakland website, it makes a reference to an oil and wax combination on the base, but that's just for the USA made models. In the case of the Lakelands, Brian at Lakland clarified for me that it's using a satin polyester finish on the necks. Then also on the maple fretboards, it's also using that finish as well, whereas the rosewood fretboards do not need that. So that's just a clarification there that the neck of the Skyline series is using a satin polyester finish. In regards to the neck, in case you're wondering, yes, it is a bolt-on neck. It's got these 5 bolts in the back and this kind of angled design here, which allows you to get up to these higher frets without as much interference with the body. And on the neck too, what I like is I like this string tree that actually handles all 5 strings. It's not like on the Fender where you just have the 3 highest strings being affected by a string tree. This bass has all 5 strings through the string tree. Also like the alignment of the 2 and 3 tuners, the 3x2, however you want to call that. I think that's a nice design, very aesthetically pleasing headstock on this bass. And yeah, I think that's for the most part what I can tell you about the neck on it. It does have the truss rod adjustment there at the base of the neck, and it's got a nice little groove here to be able to get your tool in there to make the adjustment. But like I said, I haven't had to touch that yet because it came out of the box perfectly in perfect playing condition. The tuners on the bass are hip shots, and they're pretty much what you'd expect from hip shots. I think hip shots are great tuners. I installed a pair on my Fender Jazz, and they've been great tuners, and these seem to be just as good as I would expect from them. Since they're hip shots, they should be a lighter weight than your standard tuners. I'm going to assume that they're an ultralight based hip shot tuner, but I will take one off the base and weigh it so we can find out for sure and compare it against the ones that I have on this base, as well as comparing it to the weights of some other tuners, just out of curiosity, just to see how light these tuners are. And if we determine that they're kind of heavy, then that means you could actually get some lighter tuners to replace them with if you were concerned about neck dive on the base. But as far as functionality goes, tuners work great. Another thing about the tuners too to mention is I really like the matte gray finish that they have here on the winding post versus the silver on the actual tuning peg. But that matte gray finish there, I think that's really classy looking. And actually it's funny, a lot of people that see the base actually point that out and say, hey, I really like that matte finish on the tuners. That looks really classy. And I agree, it does. And so kind of wish the rest of the hardware had that same kind of matte finish. But anyway, it's a nice little touch there. And so, cool. Okay, I've just taken off the one of the tuners here, and we're going to take this and we're going to weigh it, see how much it weighs. Taking the whole assembly there to weigh. You can see the hole there. I mean, it's using a spacer there, but that's the hole size for the tuners. So one thing that's important to point out here is that the weight on these ultralights for the Lakland is for a full-size clover tuner, whereas the ultralights that I put on my Fender Jazz were the mini clover version, which are a little bit smaller, so that probably is the reasoning for the lighter weight that you're seeing here. So now let's look at the bridge of the bass. It's definitely got that classic oval Lakland bridge that all the Lakelands have. Love it or hate it. I'm fine with it. I like it. I think it looks good. Seems to be perfectly fine. But one thing that I noticed when I first got the bass and I changed out the strings to the strings that I typically use, all my basses are strung with Ernie Ball slinkies. And in this case, I've been also converting to a lighter gauge. So I think 125 is my B string. But yeah, that's pretty much what all my basses now have is Ernie Balls. When I first went to put these on and I routed my string because it's got through body stringing. And I routed my string through and pulled it tight and realized, oh no, the string tapered down before I even got to the nut. So I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to buy different strings for it. And then I realized, oh, I can actually go straight through the bridge because it's got both options, either through the body or through the bridge. And when I strung it through the bridge, then the strings were long enough to work. And so that would of course be because it's a 35 scale bass. I actually got string through on the jazz bass, and that's the way I have the jazz bass strung. And since it's a shorter scale using the same strings, it has plenty of string length for that. Whereas on a 35 scale, you can't do string through body with standard length strings. So I guess you'll need to get a longer scale if you wanted to go through the body, the string, the bass. Minor thing, but I thought I would let you know just so that you are aware of that. It's not something that I thought about until I went to string the bass. All right, so let's take a look at the pickups. They are Bartolini's. These are the MK1s, and I think they sound pretty good. Actually, they're, the EHB also has Bartolini's, but they have BH2s, I think, or what the pickups are called in that bass. And I know a lot of people say that the pickups in the BH2s and these Ibanez basses, that they sound too dark. But I'll be honest, I like the way they sound a whole lot. But of course, it depends on the style of music that you play. I think a lot of people that probably complain about dark pickups probably are playing a harder rock or metal or something like that. So yeah, definitely in that case, they would be too dark. But for the type of music I'm doing a lot of, worship music and original, songs that aren't too driving, rocking, they're fine for me. So your preferences will of course vary, but in my opinion, I think that these pickups and those pickups both have a very similar sound, that general Bartolini sound. So if you like that sound, you'll probably be happy with it. If you don't, then you'll probably want to upgrade it. I don't know, I think they're good pickups. I'm not going to worry about upgrading. However, that leads us to the preamp. And the preamp is definitely one area where you might want to consider upgrading the bass. I'm definitely at some point going to upgrade this preamp. I think that it's the weak area of this bass. And after I got the bass and I started playing it, I definitely started doing a lot of Googling to find out if, what other people thought of the preamp, and they all kind of had the same complaints that I did, that the high end just felt a little too brittle. That EQ-wise, it just didn't seem to, I don't know, it didn't seem like it was the right EQ points, the frequencies. But I mean, it works good, but it's just not great. So I probably will change that out. And one thing that I just recently learned, and I think this is important to point out, is when I got the bass, I was of the impression that it was, since it's an active bass, I also thought that by pulling out that knob, that actually put it into passive mode. I was wrong. That is not passive mode. That simply bypasses the EQ. So don't buy this thinking, oh, it's a active and passive bass, just depending on how I adjust, how I do the knob here, whether I lift it up or push it down. It's just an active bass. but you can bypass the EQ, which is kind of a bummer. And so that also means that if the battery dies in the bass, you can't pop it into passive mode and keep playing like on that bass, because the battery has been dead in that bass for about the last year because I've been playing it just in passive mode. I could take the battery out of that bass, and I've done it, and still play it in passive mode. It won't, of course, go in active mode, but you can still play in passive mode. But that works for me because I have an outboard preamp that I run my bass through anyway, so I can do all my tone shaping there. But in this case, I can't run this bass in passive. All I can do is bypass the EQ. So something to consider, I'll probably modify this at some point and add a preamp that is active passive. More than likely it'll probably be the John East Unipre. That's probably the one I'm most looking at right now. So yeah, I'll change that at some point, but just keep that in mind, that if you're buying the bass and you're like, hey, the 5501 is cheaper than the 5502, I could save some money and get this bass. Yeah, it's a great bass, but you have to consider how much it'll cost to upgrade the preamp, because I do think the preamp upgrade is definitely something that probably at least 60 or 70% of the people that buy the bass will probably want to do. All right, so what does it feel like to actually play the bass in different positions? For example, I've got it sitting down right now. Let me back up a little so we can see more of the bass on my lap here. So as you can see, if I just kind of let it go, it tends to want to, it can very easily just want to slide off your leg here. So it's almost like you have to kind of keep your arm here in order to keep it from sliding off. Of course, you could wear it sitting down with a strap, and that would of course help, but still it doesn't sit on your knee like a jazz bass would, or many other basses would, just because of this short lower bout that it has here. However, that makes it very, very, very easy to get to all these upper frets here. If you're somebody who plays way up here on your bass, there's like nothing here to get in your way. So it definitely makes accessing the higher notes on the bass very easy, but it makes playing the bass sitting down a little bit trickier. So one thing I thought about doing, and I haven't done it, and I'm not sure I will, but I've thought about doing it, is maybe gluing some almost like maybe an abrasive strip of, you know, like sandpaper or something like that, glue it on there or something so that it'll stick to my my leg better, my pants, but I don't know if I want to do that. I'll probably just end up, you know, making sure I have a strap on when I'm playing it sitting down. But I've realized that this is mostly how I play a bass sitting down, with it sitting on my leg. This bass actually is not too terribly hard to play this way. So you could play the bass in this position, and it's fairly easy to do versus something like a jazz bass, or if you try to play a jazz bass in that position, you have to really split your legs further apart in order to get the lower part of that bass seated down in the position there. So this is kind of a hard bass to play in that style. So I think that's why I've gotten used to playing a bass this way, is from years of having this bass and playing it in this position. So, so yeah, anyway, you can play it in two different positions. It works this way fairly well, and it works this way as long as you got a strap on to keep it from slipping off your leg. All right, so here's the bass on a strap. As you can see how it balances, I have to say it's pretty good. I think it's above average in how that it balances. There's a little bit of a neck dive to it and a little bit of a pull on my left shoulder. But then again, as I've mentioned, this is a lighter than normal Lakland bass. So I'm pretty sure that if it was a little bit heavier on the body, that would probably help to kind of anchor it a little bit more in place. But that being said, I would probably say it's above average in how it balances. It's not too bad on the neck dive, but it's not my Ibanez EHB either, which is off camera over here. That thing just spoils it for all other basses. So coming from 2 years of playing that bass, that just set the bar so incredibly high that no other bass that's full size with a headstock on it can have any chance of competing with that bass. But definitely for a full-size bass with a headstock, I would say that this is probably above average. Now keep in mind that, you know, I'm kind of a thinner guy too, and we all have different body shapes. This is where I have the bass on the strap. You might have it higher or lower. All of these things can impact how the bass sits. And you know, for example, if sometimes I'll play with a sports jacket on, and that extra padding of the sports jacket will kind of push out a little bit more against the bass because it's a little bit extra inch or two of padding there, and it actually makes the bass sit a little bit more firmly against me without pulling as much. So I'm thinking, well, if I was a little bit more portly of a person, had a few more pounds on me, that might actually also help with holding the bass in place by pushing up against the bass here. Yeah, there's a lot of variables that can impact how the bass sits on you when you're standing up. Also, I'm using a pretty wide strap, a nice cushy strap from Groove Gear, and it works really well. So again, just know that there's lots of different variables, but I'd say this bass is above average in its how it feels when you're standing up. The body shape is not going to be as comfortable, in my opinion, as like a jazz bass, which just, I think that offset body is just a wonderful design. And one thing to keep in mind, if you have a chance to play one of these in the store before buying it, you're able to play it on a strap, and you're like, this feels not quite as comfortable as a jazz bass, because it does you kind of feel a little bit more of this hump here, where the jazz bass, it just kind of sits a little bit more natural. But one thing to consider if you like the bass, but you're like, I'm not sure about the bass body itself, Lakland does now have a version of this bass with an offset body like a jazz bass, and it's called, I believe, the 5501 OS, offset design, or I don't know what the S stands for, but definitely the O stands for offset. Maybe it's offset sized, or I don't know, but it's it's the same body shape, but they just kind of tweaked it a little bit to give it more of a jazz style bass kind of offset. So you might want to check out that particular bass if you're interested in the 5501, but you want to have something that's a little bit more body-wise, it's a little bit more like a jazz bass. All right, so this is something that I want to show about both basses, just having to do with the 34 versus 35 scale. You would actually think that the 35 scale bass would be a little bit longer, but as you can see, this is the 34 scale Fender jazz bass. This is the 35 scale Lakland, and they're actually look about the same size. Actually, if I take both of them off the stands here and set them next to each other, they're actually right at about the exact same height.
So yeah, it's not actually that the base is growing by an inch. They just somehow managed to get it where the base comes out to the same size. It must be where the bridge is positioned on the body, I'm guessing, but yeah, they're pretty much the same length. Also, if you want to see how the bodies do vary, you can see that I don't know if you can see it in that. Let me bring it back a little bit more here. The Lakland has a much smaller body. You can see how drastic that lower cutout is on the body, which gives you much more access to those lower frets versus the Fender. All right, so I got the camera repositioned a little bit more so we can see this a little better. But if we take the Fender Jazz bass, this kind of will show you how the bodies differ. As you can see, the body on the Lakland is a lot smaller. You can definitely see how drastic that cutout is on the lower bout there, allowing you to get much more access to the frets higher up on the fretboard versus the Fender Jazz, which that lower bout definitely gets in your way a lot more. But yeah, the upper horn is about the same. Just about the same. It looks like it's a tad shorter. But yeah, overall the body is a lot smaller on the Lakland. Okay, two things I want to show you on the bass. Number one, on the back here, I want to show you the battery compartment. One of the things that I noticed when I first got it is these batteries, the space for the battery is pretty doggone tight. I'm going to take it out so I can demonstrate putting the battery in. You would think that this would be a pretty simple thing, and then of course maybe when I'm doing this video it'll do it really easy, but the first time I did this, the only time I've done this so far, it was really hard to get this battery to fit back in. Okay, there it goes. It's not wanting to do it again, just like before. You got to really kind of push down on it. Wasn't too bad that time because I wasn't as afraid of it this time. The first time you try it, you're like, oh, am I going to break it? But yeah, you got to really kind of pop that thing down in there. It's a pretty tight squeeze. Now I'm going to take off the plate here so you can take a look at the electronics, just because I know there's probably some people out there that are curious. What does the preamp actually look like? What does all the electronics look like? So let's take a look and I'll show you. All right, so let's pop this off. If I can. Okay. So there you go. Some kind of thing there. I don't know much about electronics. It's best not to let me play with electronics, so I won't comment on anything. But yeah, there you go. That's what it looks like, the little rat nest there. So I don't know if that's helpful for anyone, but do what you will with that information.
All right, so the 5501 and the 5502 are very similar basses from Lakland. And real quick, I just wanted to kind of point out the differences if you weren't sure what the difference between the two models are. They're basically the same bass, but mostly with just different pickups and preamp. Although the 5502 model has more color options and finish options, and it also has some different variations on the neck. For example, at least me, I've only ever seen 5501s with a maple neck, whereas the 5502, I've seen different variations of both maple and the other wood that they use, not rosewood now, I think it's the laurel wood, you know, the darker wood. And then also the 5502, there's plenty of examples out there with roasted maple necks too, which I've never seen that on the 5501. So the 5501 seems to be more their entry-level bass, but it's a fantastic bass other than, like I've said before, the preamp. Yeah, so you might be thinking, well, hey, you know, I'll get a 5501, save myself a bunch of money because it's considerably cheaper. And but then again, consider that, you know, if you got to buy a new preamp for it, then, you know, it starts to level back out. But then again, I've never owned a 5502, so maybe if I own one of those, I might want to, you know, invest more money in upgrading it, so then the price range separates back out again. So just something to keep in mind. Yes, it's a lot more affordable than the 5502, but you might need to put some money into it to get it upgraded to where you want it to be. But it's definitely a worthwhile base to put some money into. And like I said, I'm definitely keeping this. I'm probably going to upgrade the preamp at some point, and if I do, I'll do a review on that as well. But yeah, I think it's a fantastic base either way, but just realize that you don't have as many options with this base as you do with the 5502. Okay, and you're probably also wondering what's the difference between the Skyline versions and the USA made versions. Why is the same base apparently so different in pricing from Lakland? That's because this model, the Skyline series, is made overseas, and then it's brought back to the USA, to the Lakland factory in Chicago. They give it the final tweaking and then send it out the door. So it gets reviewed by Lakland and set up, and, you know, all the fixings done on it there before it sends out. And so that's why it's cheaper, just because it's manufactured overseas, but they do handle it when it comes back to the US and make sure that it's in good playing shape. Whereas the other models that are much more expensive are made completely in the USA. But for me, I'm like, these bases are really good. So I can only imagine how good a US made version of it would be. But of course, it's a big chunk of change more to get the USA made version, but I haven't had the chance yet of playing a USA made Lakland to really kind of see the difference myself to know. But all I do know is these overseas made models are pretty fantastic. Now, also, if you're looking online for a used Lakland on Reverb or eBay or wherever else, you probably, well, you may come across something called a Lakland Shoreline. I did when I was doing some searches, and I'm like, Shoreline, what is this, like some kind of knockoff? What is this? And apparently, from the research I've done on it, and there's not much information I've been able to find out online, but apparently, if I understand correctly, the Shoreline series is a licensed Lakland base that's made in Japan. And I don't know if Lakland has anything to do with the building process or anything like that at the base. I don't really know for sure, or if they just license it off to this other company, or if they do have any involvement, but I haven't been able to find anything regarding the Shoreline on the Lakland website, at least that I've seen. And there's very little information online, but I'm pretty sure that is the case, that it's licensed to a company in Japan that makes the base. And from the research, again, limited information out there, the research that I've been able to find on it, looking on base forums and people who've stated either owning a Shoreline or have owned a Shoreline in the past, it seems like all of the feedback that they've given on the Shoreline series has been positive, that it is a very good base. So I'm just going off of the information that I've read online. I can't say for sure myself, but if you do see a Shoreline, that's what the story is on that. So also, when you're looking at Lakland bases, make sure that you're looking at a Skyline versus a Shoreline, and you know where the origin of the base is, because normally the Shoreline, if you see an ad for it, it's probably going to be shipped from Japan. So you're going to be paying extra for the shipping from Japan, even though usually the Shoreline pricing seems to be a little bit less than the Skylines. But I don't know how good the resale value is on a Shoreline if you were to buy one. But just make sure you're looking closely and seeing on the headstock, does it say Shoreline or does it say Skyline when you're taking into consideration the price of the base. So I just thought I would share that information, since there's not much information out there on the Shorelines, and I've come across quite a few on my searches online. Interjecting in this video once again during the editing process in order to clarify some information as it was given to me by Lakland in regards to the Shoreline series. Yes, it is a legitimate bass series, but it is licensed by ESP Guitars for distribution in the Asian markets. And so it is a legitimate bass, But just know that since it's not built by Lakland, it's not supported by Lakland. They're separate. They have nothing to do with the actual instrument itself other than licensing it out to ESP guitars. So just keep that in mind. It's never intended for distribution in the US. So if you buy one used and you get it shipped over, it's yeah, you're not going to get support from Lakland as expected for it here in America. And but apparently they're pretty good quality from what Lakland has told me, at least the models that they've come across. But just know that it is not supported by Lakland and it is a licensed product by ESP Guitars. All right, so my final thoughts on the Lakland 5501, probably no surprise, is that it's a fantastic bass and I love it. Pretty much gave that away at the beginning of the video and throughout the video. And yeah, so I just want to say Lakland, fantastic job on this bass. Excellent, I love it. If I could, I'd give it 5 lobster claws out of 5, but I don't think I'm the guy that can do that. So I'll just say it's 5 stars out of 5. Love this bass, it's really great. I'll probably be investing more money in Lakland basses in the future, unless you want to, if you're listening, Lakland, if you want to, send me a few to review for you, I'd be happy to do so. But yeah, I can definitely see myself investing in more Lakland basses. It's been a game changer. I didn't think for a full-size bass that I was going to like 35 scale. I do. I didn't think on a full-size bass I would like a fat, chunky neck. I do. So it's really kind of changed my thinking on basses, and it's not quite this bass as far as ergonomic bliss, but it's probably the closest thing I've found to it in a full-size bass. Of course, keep in mind again that this particular bass that I have is a lot lighter than the standard Lakland. So Lakland, I hope you'll make some more lighter basses, because again, I'm very interested in acquiring some more models of your instrument. But yeah, it's a fantastic bass. If you're still watching this video, yeah, I can definitely say it's a safe bet to purchase this bass if everything I've shared with you sounds like it's in agreement with you as far as all the specs and all the details on it. Yeah, I really don't think you can go wrong with this bass. So yeah, it's fantastic. At some point I'm going to upgrade the preamp, but other than that, I love it. It's a great bass. And yeah, thank you for watching this video. God bless you.